You're listening to the Not Just Numbers podcast, a conversation with mathematicians on their work and their lives to get to know them and discuss common biases and misconceptions.
Welcome everybody to a new episode of the Not Just Numbers podcast. I'm Jart, I'm here with Marcello.
Hi.
Armin.
Hey.
And Lara.
Hi.
And we are going to talk today about what it is like to be a postdoctoral researcher. So let's introduce our guest. Armin, you wanted to say a few words?
Yeah, indeed. I just wanted to say a few words about my motherland, Iran, which is currently at a crucial milestone in its thousands of years old history. Following their continuous 47-year struggle against the Islamic regime in Iran, which has proven to possess every characteristic of an occupying power, my compatriots took to the streets in their millions in response to a call by our crown prince in exile, His Imperial Highness Reza Pahlavi, demanding the overthrow of this regime and its replacement with a democratic, secular national government. However, they faced massive oppression resulting in the massacre of over 32,500 people within 2 days. And this figure reflects only conservative estimates, while field observations suggest that the death toll could be as high as 100,000. So I would like to use this platform to convey the message of my compatriots to Iranian and non-Iranian listeners of this podcast. To the non-Iranian listeners of this podcast, please speak up, contact your representatives in parliament or other political institutions, and ask them to support the people of Iran by recognizing their true representative, His Imperial Highness Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, whose name is chanted by millions of Iranians as the figure who can and will lead the country toward democracy and prosperity. And to my compatriots who are listening to this episode, as Her Imperial Majesty Shahbanu Farah Pahlavi always says, light shall triumph over darkness. Long live the King, Javid Shah. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
That's right. We know that a lot of things are going on there, and not being Iranian ourselves and being so far away, I think it's the least we can do to let people speak on their own for their own countries. And by the way, Armin was one of our guests already. You know him from the PhD students episode, so we will put a link on the notes to know more about him and his path to mathematics. And today we would like to introduce a new guest for our podcast, Lara Vicino, which is a postdoc here in the number theory group, right?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here, first of all. This sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah, I am a postdoc here in the algebra group. I've been here for 2 years, and now I will be here for 2 years more. Looking forward to that.
Thank you both very much for coming. So today's episode, as Jart just said, is going to be about what is a postdoc and what it's like being a postdoc, a postdoctoral research, and how your life changed from the PhD to now. But before getting there, as usual, we would like to know our guests. So I would like to ask Lara to tell us a bit who you are and what you're doing as a mathematician first, in a way that should be understandable for people that have no clue what we're talking about, and then later on why you do that.
Okay, so, I'm originally from Italy, where I did my bachelor and my master in mathematics, first in Pisa and then in Trento. Then I actually moved to Denmark for my PhD. I did my PhD at the Technical University of Denmark in Copenhagen. And then after that, I moved here as a postdoc researcher. And my research is in between algebraic geometry and coding theory, which are two very different things, but they have this very nice connection. So coding theory deals with basically reliable communication through unreliable channels. So telecommunications, but also data storage. And the idea is that you can design certain mathematical tools called error correcting codes that you can use to encode your data to make sure that if errors occur or if you happen to sort of have a part of this data damaged, then you can retrieve it. And what I do is basically I use objects from algebraic geometry to design these mathematical tools.
Are those error correcting codes the same that when I was young, CD-ROMs were introduced? And one of the things that was going about the CD-ROMs is that they had strong error correcting codes so that even if there were some damage on the CD, they could use this extra data to reconstruct what was there. Is this the same type of error correcting codes?
Absolutely, yes, indeed. Indeed, I remember actually when I started my master, CDs were still quite popular, so that was still an example we were introduced to. So what you do when you store data on a CD is first you apply some error correcting codes, so you sort of chop off your data into blocks, and then you apply some transformation, and then at that point you store these strings of bits on your CD. And now even if you have a scratch on your CD, you can still read it. That's the idea.
But what you do is a lot more abstract than just this application to CDs, right?
Yes. So I guess I am on the more abstract side of the thing. So what we do is we study codes that you can construct from algebraic varieties. I mean, ultimately, it's still about linear error correcting codes. So they are going to be vector spaces, but the way in which we construct these vector spaces is by picking points on certain algebraic varieties and evaluating rational functions on these points. So what we actually do is, to understand properties of these codes, we study the variety, and we study how certain arithmetic and geometric properties of these varieties influence the properties of the corresponding code.
Okay, I like this because it's very far away from what I do, so I want to try to rephrase what you're saying to see if I understood correctly. You're saying that these error correcting codes actually have a structure. They're not just random numbers that appear with the data. And to understand this structure, you can study some related curved spaces, this algebraic variety, like solution of a polynomial equation or something. And by studying this solution, you can reflect back properties on these abstract spaces that describe the structure of the error correcting codes.
Exactly.
Very cool. How on earth did you come up doing this stuff?
Well, this was, I guess, it was a bit random in the beginning. So after my bachelor, well, the only thing I knew is that I very much like algebra courses. I really liked it, and I wanted to sort of focus my master as much as possible on this kind of mathematics. And I found out that there was a study line at the University of Trento, which was specifically on coding theory and cryptography. And well, I didn't really know a lot about coding theory back then, but what I really liked about this study line was that it was very focused on algebra courses. And then they also had a scholarship you could apply for. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm going to try this. And if I get the scholarship, it sounds like a nice thing to do. So I ended up there, and then I started to understand these connections that there were between this, in principle, this very applied side of coding theory and this very abstract side of mathematics. And I really liked it. Then for my master's thesis, actually, I started studying codes coming from algebraic curves. And I thought it was super cool because I think, I really like the theory of algebraic curves because it's really something like where there's a sort of perfect mirroring correspondence between algebra and geometry, because you have basically this equivalence of categories between curves and one variable function fields. And so, I thought that was super cool. And it was also super cool that you had this then very concrete application. So that's how I got into the subject, and I took it from there.
And if we take one step back, how did you get into mathematics?
So actually, I think up to some point in high school, I somehow was convinced I wanted to study medicine. Now, thinking back at it, I don't know how. But then I think between my third and my fourth year of high school, actually my mathematics teacher changed. And suddenly we had a teacher that I liked a lot. And she was really passionate. And for the first time, I think I actually got to understand what mathematics was about. Because up to that point, we had basically just been, solving a bunch of exercises, and it wasn't even clear why, or what was the point of the whole of it. But then she started introducing more to, how actually a mathematician thinks. So ideas, or the idea behind a concept, the idea behind a theorem or a proof. And I really fell in love with that. And so I started to sort of think, well, maybe I could do this. This seems like a quite versatile thing. And so that's how it started.
So you did do this already in high school, talking about the ideas behind the proof, the structure, and so on?
Not a lot, I guess, not as extensive as you would do then in a bachelor program, but quite a bit. I remember, for instance, when this teacher was introducing the concept of limits, and I thought that was super cool because she really gave us, quite intuitive, very very interesting idea of what a limit is, and I was very struck by that.
Thank you very much. Armin, Since not everybody will have listened to the other episode and they might not remember, would you like to tell us a bit, at least, or how you got into mathematics, what your background is and what you're working on? Because I know today is nice because we have the kind of two ends of the spectrum. You both had applied components, but one is a lot more theoretical than the other, I would say.
Indeed. Well, in contrast to Lara, I'm not a pure mathematician. Actually, my background was in electrical engineering, although specialized in systems and control theory, both during my bachelor's and master's. But yeah, now here in Groningen, I work at the Department of Applied Mathematics, and especially in the systems and control group. And the work that I'm working on is actually formal methods in control theory, which is, the name sounds very complicated, but it's actually the intersection of computer science and control theory, where we try to employ tools from computer science to drive results in control theory. And the idea is actually very simple, I would say. Nowadays, most engineering applications require systems to behave autonomously in uncertain environments. So as you can imagine, controlling these systems would be very difficult. And the specifications that you specify for them are also very complicated. And formal methods basically provides you the tool to simplify these specifications in such a way that you can actually control your system to behave according to those specifications. And my research mostly focuses on somehow reducing the complexity of systems by abstracting them in such a way that they can become simple enough to be controlled. Yeah, this is something that I also pursued during my PhD, and in my postdoc, I'm actually continuing that.
So is the simplification also so that you can then formalize them in a way that can be used with the formal language specification or theorem provers to actually ensure that they compose or connect nicely?
Indeed. Of course, when it comes to huge systems, high-dimensional ones, then of course applying techniques from computer science, the formal methods, would be very difficult. And that's the part that you need to somehow reduce this complexity. And of course, the approach that I took during my PhD was to employ the so-called modular methods, which I always say the gist of these methods is to somehow view systems as components like a Lego particle, you know? And the nice thing about Lego particles is that they are modular. You can easily connect them to each other, attach them, and of course decompose a Lego architecture or structure into small pieces. The whole idea of modular method is to indeed try to formulate systems as such components, so that you can actually decompose a complicated structure of a system into smaller and simpler ones. And yes, that would be, I would say, the main approach.
And when was it that you got into mathematics?
It's an interesting question. I remember indeed when I was in high school, I personally liked physics very much. But soon I realized that I had no talents in physics, but I had talent in mathematics. But yet I couldn't let go of physics. So I thought to myself, you know what, let's follow a path that somehow coincides with both physics and mathematics. And I don't know, for some reason, for me, that path was electrical engineering. And at the first year of my bachelor's, I realized that I'm fascinated by robotics. It was still weird. But then on the second year, I realized why I was fascinated by robotics, because I had a passion for controlling them, actually. And that's how I discovered control theory. Yeah, fortunately, a specialization of electrical engineering is indeed control theory, which has nothing to do, of course, with physics anymore. It's applied math. But yeah, that's how I got into it. And to be honest, the only reason that I'm now affiliated with Applied Mathematics department is that control theory is part of the Applied Mathematics department in Groningen. In many other institutes, it's actually part of electrical engineering or mechanical, I would say.
Oh, interesting. I like when the boundaries get so blurred between disciplines.
So what I was wondering, you say you were very interested in physics as well. Have you ever considered going back to mathematical physics, or are you really into the applied mathematics by now?
Well, when I was a high school student, I had no idea what mathematical physics is. So I don't think back then I could have found this path. But now, to be honest, I've developed a deep passion for applied mathematics. So I would say it's now too late to consider going into that direction.
Well, I'm glad you found the path that works for you and that you're happy in applied mathematics. So this podcast also wants to highlight the people outside of mathematics. So Lara, what do you like to do outside of mathematics? What are your hobbies?
So, I like many different things. Actually, during my PhD, I was part for some time of the organizing team of a film festival in Copenhagen, which was a really great experience, extremely enriching. And I've tried to stay somehow within the film community also here, as now I am part of the volunteers of Vera Cinema. And besides, I really like music. A bit of, more or less every kind. I've studied piano for many years, so I'm still quite into, going to classical concerts, but also, I'm also very much into, rock or indie alternative, so I'm still also in that kind of environment. And besides, I like running. So I mostly do that and I do some CrossFit. I'm still not very good at it, I would say.
So a lot of different hobbies outside of math, a lot of time left over, I would say.
I guess, I mean, you have to sort of, or at least for me, it was definitely a process also to learn how to manage the time, especially during my PhD, because of course, I think, at least for me, a thing that I both love and find challenging of the academic life is all the freedom you have with your time. Because, I mean, no one, or at least in my case, like, sometimes you have some deadlines, but then most of the time it's about you have to get things done, but there's not actually someone sort of being there and telling you, oh, you should do this right now. So you have to sort of learn how to make sure that you invest the time in a productive way and also leave space for other things. But I think if you manage to do that, then you definitely have time to also pursue other passions.
That's good to hear. I totally agree. Armin, what do you like to do outside of your mathematics?
Well, like Lara, I'm also a cinephile, but not as serious as her. So I'm just a passionate audience, I would say. Aside from that, I'm a jazz enthusiast. I'm really into jazz. Well, that's pretty much it. I do other things like anybody else. I do travel, running, going to the gym, but these two are actually my two main passions.
Do you also play some instrument?
No. Yeah, again, I'm just a passionate listener. Nothing more than that.
And Lara, do you still play the piano?
No, so actually I stopped playing many years ago. Basically when I moved for my master, and then I started to focus on other things. But it's actually something it's been sort of in the back of my head, because I guess at that point I was like, okay, now I don't have all of this time to invest in the piano anymore, so I will just stick to, be a piano enthusiast. But I am feeling like I sort of miss it. So I've been considering to finally get a piano back and maybe get back to playing.
And building on this, I'm curious about your relation with free time, Armin, between PhD and now, perhaps.
In what sense do you mean?
How was it for you to manage the free time? Lara was saying that it was like she had to learn how to manage the time in such a way that you could work effectively, but also free enough time to pursue your interest and passion. And I can relate with that as well. And I think it took to me a lot longer to actually learn how to manage the time. And I was curious, how was it for you?
Yeah, I completely agree with Lara that the flexibility is indeed an advantage of the academic environment. For me, that was also comforting in a sense that I could manage everything myself, which is a huge responsibility, I would say, but at least you have control over everything, over your life. Well, the thing for me is the one thing that I cannot help doing is that I tend to constantly think about the problems that I'm dealing with, the math problems, control-related problems whatsoever. And so it somehow haunts me all the time. So when I take a shower, I'm thinking about it when I'm on my way to the office. But at the same time, I would say I'm comfortable with it. So it doesn't bother me, the fact that I constantly think about it. In fact, sometimes it helps me better deal with the problems that I'm thinking about. Because, for instance, sometimes rather than working on my desk, on my computer, I do think about the problem when I'm brainstorming in the gym. And that's actually, for me, very helpful. So my point is that the way I managed the time was that I tried not to force myself to get things done in certain situations or at certain times. So my approach was that I want to get this thing done, and I do it whenever suits me and whenever I am more efficient. So yeah, and this, of course, knowing that would allow me to leave some room to pursue the things that I like aside from work.
How is it with you, Lara?
Yeah, I think now also, because I feel, for instance, transitioning from PhD to postdocs, I feel, well, there are some new responsibilities added, which is something, for instance, I felt a lot, especially at the beginning, in the sense that somehow during my PhD, I felt sort of like more carefree, in the sense of like, I mean, I guess I had a very good relationship with my supervisors, and I was sort of in this feeling of like, okay, I'm going to have fun with this problem. And, you know, when things get bad, if they do, we're probably figuring it out together, or like I felt like there was someone watching my back. And then after that, I had the feeling that like, okay, now I'm sort of on my own, which, I mean, of course I'm not, because I have a mentor here and I work with people. So, I mean, there's still somehow, of course, there's still people you talk to or you work with, but I did feel a lot this shift, let's say, in responsibility. And at the beginning, this did affect also what I was doing in my free time, because I was much more concerned also like how to organize my research or like how to deal with this new status. So I think it did take me some time to readjust, but now I think I found a balance again. And I think my strategy is just to start focusing, maybe having some sort of concrete objectives day by day, let's say short-term objectives that I can sort of see I can get done. And then, although I do share the same problem, let's say, that like when I'm especially if I'm stuck on something, then I cannot really get it out of my head, and it's sort of always there and it stays, and you think about it even in very random moment, maybe when you're just doing the shopping or stuff like that. But I think I've gotten a bit better to lock it out. And when I've decided that like, I don't know, tonight I'm at a cinema night or I'm meeting friends or I'm going for a run, then I just try to shut it off. It helps, for instance, if I listen to some music or I just, it's not easy, but that's my strategy.
So it sounds like I haven't been able to manage that yet. It's good that you have done so.
Yeah, I mean, then, of course, I think it also really depends on the period. I think, in periods when maybe you are a bit more under pressure or really stressed out about something, then it works less well. But I do feel somehow that having different things, like maybe too many of them to some extent in your free time actually helps, because then that is also sort of a responsibility, and then you need to make time for it. And so you're sort of forced to stop doing mathematics.
So if I may ask, because I was wondering, so when it comes to tasks like brainstorming, for instance, do you force yourself to do this within a certain time window? Because for me, for instance, when it comes to brainstorming, I don't know, I need some freedom. Sometimes if I go out for a walk, and think about the problem, it is more efficient, rather than just sticking to the desk, writing something on the pad. How were you able to do this?
I think this happens to me as well. I mean, I guess there are those days, at least for me, where maybe you're there, you're at your desk, as you say, but your brain just is like, I don't know, sort of completely blocked. So there's definitely been times in which, I've been at my desk maybe for 2 hours and I'm like, okay, this has been completely unproductive. And then maybe I go for a walk and I feel better. And so, that is totally true. It's not a perfect system. It doesn't always work because indeed sometimes you're just, you are at the office, but your brain is not really there. So I agree. Sometimes it's just inevitable that you take it home and maybe it actually works better. Maybe at some point when you're cooking, suddenly you're like, oh, actually, I could try this.
I guess that's the challenge of working with the brain. Sometimes the brain doesn't want to cooperate. But what you are saying feels a lot like both my experience and Armin. It took to me a long, long time to learn how to properly manage, to separate work and the rest of the life. Like very often I were coming home and I still had ideas in my head and I had to work on it, or they were coming up in weekends and so on. I do that a lot less now, but it took a long time. And I think one thing that helped was having kids. Then they don't care about what you need to do. That especially when they are young, they really need you at whatever time they need you. And so it helps a bit more. It also, I think, helped having this discussion more openly. When I was younger, I was more seeing a lot of people working all the time, night and day and weekends, and just doing that. And so now I thought that was the right way to do it. Maybe even just subconsciously. And if you talk to people my age, we had pretty much similar experience. So I think also culturally it's different now. But this thing of working hard on a problem, getting stuck, not being able to do anything, then taking a step back, going for a shower or a walk or anything else, and then the idea popping up, that's very, very recognizable. And I think I'll add a link to the podcast with a video from John Cleese. I don't know if you saw that. John Cleese had this lecture on creativity many years ago. And he was saying creativity is like breathing. You need to give it time to expand. And so you're there and play with the ideas in a way that makes absolutely no sense. Throw them one against the other, see what happens. And then at some point you need to compress it. So start dropping all the things that didn't work and now try to shape it. But that's not the end of it. Then you have to breathe again and destroy all the structure again and then compress it again. And I think this getting stuck and focusing is a compressing part and trying to put all the bits together. And then getting a walk is like the breathing part where you're doing the brainstorming, or you don't really care if the idea are working. You just let them come and see what happens when you try to put them together.
Exactly. I would say it's something shared by any type of work that deals with creativity. I mean, you can even hear about the same experience that artists have, or writers, for instance. And not that you don't have creativity in engineering, for instance, but there you are discussing a problem that it is more or less clear what to do with it, so that's why engineers can somehow manage the creativity time within a certain period, according to a plan. But I would say with research and also again with art, for instance, it's not very easy to somehow force it into a certain time window, do it according to a schedule. So sometimes indeed you need to.
I wonder what this is like for a student, because I can't remember how it was for me as a student right now.
I am wondering how it was for you as students as well, but just from my own experience, I definitely have problems that get stuck in my head. I don't want to know how often I've dreamt up a solution to a homework exercise just because during my sleep I was finally able to digest everything and actually come up with the answer. So did you feel like you had this also during your bachelor's and master's, or did this really come when you started doing more independent research, Lara?
I think what you say actually resonates with me. It has happened to me, but I don't have a super clear memory, but I definitely have this memory of, you go to bed after you have spent one day, for instance, working on a set of exercises or like really struggling to, understand a particular proof. And then at some point, the day after, you actually wake up and suddenly you feel like your head is much clearer about it and you got an idea. And it's like, okay, but I was just sleeping. But I guess maybe during sleep, the brain was still processing. And this is still something that to some extent happens to me now. That you go to bed in this sort of very confused, maybe also a bit frustrated state. And then the morning after you actually feel like, okay, maybe I have some clarity. Now I want to try this idea out.
Armin, this is something you experienced at all during your bachelor and master's?
Indeed. Totally relate to it, actually.
But this episode is taking a life on its own, so let me try to steer it back to our topic of the day, which is what is a postdoc and what it's like to be a postdoc. We kind of transitioned already somewhere on this side talking about how we manage the free time, but let me start first. So in your experience, what is a postdoc, Lara?
Okay, so for me, as I was mentioning, I felt definitely the change, let's say, with respect to my PhD life. The way in which I've been experiencing the postdoc so far is literally like a transitioning phase, let's say. Well, possibly from, being a PhD student, so somehow moving your first steps into academia, into actually, getting a permanent position, or maybe transitioning towards something else, so towards a career in industry or so. So I really view it as really as a transitioning phase. So as something very, very fluid as such. I feel like you do have a lot of freedom, or at least because you can decide how to steer your research more. At least the way in which I view the postdoc is some way to gain independence, in a sense, with respect to what you did during your PhD, to open up new research directions of your own, to broaden your research interests. So in this sense, I think both that it's very exciting because you have a lot of freedom and you have to learn indeed how to manage it. But it's also a bit scary, to be honest, or at least, especially at the beginning, it was for me, because I felt a lot of added responsibility for this. And I'm glad actually that I've been given this opportunity here. You can try out teaching more, for instance. So for the first time, I've been actually teaching a whole course myself. You have more interaction with students, so you can supervise students, which was also a great experience for me. So I feel like it's sort of, on one hand, it feels like something that helps you try out how it could be if you would ever get a permanent position. But on the other hand, I think it's also an experience of growth, like not only academic, but really personal.
Thanks, Armin.
Well, I'm not as experienced as Lara. I've been into this postdoc position only for a year. But if I were to make a comparison, I would say from one aspect, postdoc is like the last year of your PhD. In a sense that at the beginning of your PhD, you may need someone to take your hand and walk you through the way. But as it comes to the third and last year, of course, of your PhD, you are more or less on your own. You have to do everything yourself. You are the one who's worried about the research, every other responsibility that comes with it. And I would say postdoc is the point that these things would be propagated to, So you start your postdoc at that point exactly. And the feeling you have is more or less similar to the last year of your PhD. And of course, depending on the institution, more responsibilities could come with it. So as in Lara's case, you may have the responsibility to teach a complete course yourself. I haven't had that responsibility so far, so I cannot imagine how hard it is. But in that sense, it's like the last year of your PhD. You have the flexibility, you have the freedom, and yet you have serious responsibilities to worry about.
And what about the relationship with your supervisor? Is it the same before when it was the PhD supervisor and now that it is the postdoc supervisor? But in my mind, it's a lot more like a collaborator now.
I always joke about it. For me, the situation is like a 6-year PhD. So everything is the same. My supervisor is now my mentor. The topic is more or less the same. So I would say not much has changed. And I admittedly, since the very beginning, our relationship was indeed like collaborators. Even during the PhD, I would say Bart was modest enough to develop that kind of relationship. So we maintain that so far.
And for you, Lara, since especially you changed from one university to the other, so that must have been more drastic change, I would say.
Yes, for me, it's definitely very different. Indeed, of course, because my supervisor has changed. And also, I think, I would definitely say it's more now of a relationship just between collaborators. And I think it's also, it's both the fun and the challenging part when your supervisor is actually someone who mainly works on something else, or let's say has a very different background. And so you have some common point. And so the idea is exactly, okay, let's meet in the middle and let's bring together our research and work on some joint topic, which has been a great experience so far, but also has brought many different challenges. Because of course, when you're sort of with your PhD supervisor, or at least they have been the people bringing me up mathematically, research-wise. So then at some point, at the beginning you have to find your grounds, but then at some point you really work together as a very oiled machine, because then you have the common background and they have taught you like how, in a certain sense, I guess, how to think about the problems. So then at some point it's really a family vibe in this sense. And then when you indeed change this environment a lot, then it becomes a very different experience.
And if you think about when you started your postdoc, is there something that you would like to tell yourself a few years later that it would have been really, really worth knowing at the time, but nobody told you?
I think something I would probably tell myself is to maybe dare a bit more, to be maybe a bit less shy in some sense, because I feel, I guess this is just a general thing. Let's say I'm not the best of self-confidence, and this is something I've definitely developed a lot during my PhD, but it's definitely still an ongoing process. And I think at the start of my postdoc, indeed, I was a bit still in the PhD student mode. So I was sort of a bit too passive, in the sense of just expecting my collaborators to maybe bring up something and then I would work on it. I think I would tell myself, just start taking even more initiative, to bring things up yourself more and steer the research more, which is something I think I wasn't doing a lot in the beginning.
It's 1 year, but it's already 1 year, so you could have something to tell yourself 1 year later.
Well, yeah, indeed. I completely agree with Lara as well. That during your PhD, exactly, you have the luxury to be passive. Although, at least for my case, fortunately, I did initiate a lot. So as I mentioned, things we maintained whatever we had there as well, because it was efficient. But I totally agree with that. You have the luxury to be passive, but here, you can be passive, but then that would make you a terrible postdoc researcher, I would say. So you have to initiate, and you have to be the one who leads the research, and the mentor is the one who just backs you up. Yeah, that's quite a challenge, I would say.
So I've heard you both talk about how going from a PhD to a postdoc, you had a lot of added responsibilities. Can you tell us something about those responsibilities? Like, what does an average day or week look like as a postdoc?
So I think maybe the shape of my average week hasn't changed a lot with respect to the PhD, in the sense that it's still mostly research plus some teaching, but that's, I guess still very, very little with respect to research. But for instance, like thinking of added responsibilities, I've had the chance, which has been great, to be a leader in some group projects during workshops. In the sense, this has not been something like in my, daily routine change, but it's definitely been like 2 experiences which have also changed a lot, like my perspective. In a sense also, learning to sort of be in a somewhat leadership position in a research project. For instance, more recently, I was a group leader for one project during the Women in Numbers Europe, it's basically a workshop that happens usually every 2 or 3 years and brings together, in this case, let's say the broad community of women in number theory and geometry, algebra. And the way in which it works is that there are groups, and there are usually a couple of group leader per group, and then there are participants. And then the way in which it works is that the participants are divided into the group depending on their interests. Then there's 1 week in which we meet all together and the workshop happens. And basically during that week you start really working with the people, and then hopefully you continue this work in the months afterwards, and hopefully this leads to a publication. And for instance, this has been a great and also very stressful experience for me, because let's say for various circumstantial reasons, in the end I ended up being the only group leader of my group. There is another group leader, but she's just let's say she will be coming in as a later stage. So it's been the first time in which suddenly I was there with a group of people like eager to learn and do research on something that they had actually never worked on. So it was all on me to steer the project from beginning to the all later stages of development. And that's been, it is something that has really taught me a lot, both mathematically, because the problem itself, it's some kind of problem, let's say, I had experienced with, but also it was a new problem. So I also, you're in that phase in which you start digging up things and you find things on the way, but you're not entirely sure how it's going to end. But also it's been definitely a huge learning process to learn how to manage this group of people and how to divide tasks. So that's, let's say, definitely a responsibility I had never encountered before.
That sounds really cool. I can't wait to read the paper, hopefully, at some point.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Armin, do you have anything that you really, I haven't seen this as a responsibility in my PhD, but now as a postdoc?
Well, to be honest, for my case, things haven't much changed. So in terms of responsibilities, research-wise and also teaching-wise, everything is pretty much the same. So from that perspective, I have to say Lara is kind of a senior postdoc and I'm the junior one.
So what does an average week in your life look like?
It's pretty much like my PhD. So I mostly do the research throughout most days, and the teaching responsibilities, of course, comes with the course that I have to work on as a teacher's assistant, which is now this block actually. But aside from that, I have to admit, not much has changed for me, at least.
And what about collaborations? At least looking back at my PhD and my postdocs, one thing that was changing was that, as you said, you have to be a lot more active in your research interests and in developing your research. And part of it will be at the intersection with the person that is hiring you, your mentor. But part of that is also probably not interesting for them. And then you start talking with other people at conferences and so on. And so you start developing also your research on the side. Mm-hmm. And so you have to now juggle the research that you're respected for from your job, the research you would like to do, and also I think learning if that research is considered interesting or not by the wider community and how to make it interesting so that people actually engage with that. So is it similar to your experience now, or is not yet there?
No, it is there, although Bart is flexible in that sense that, well, he's open about new research directions. But indeed, I agree. So aside from the things that we discuss, there are topics that I find interesting, and I kind of have the feeling that he doesn't find them that interesting. So I try to just follow them on the side. And whenever I have the chance to discuss it with someone, of course, I would be happy to do so. But that hasn't happened yet, to be honest.
And Lara?
Yeah, I think that resonates with me. And in fact, I guess what's happening for me now is that I have one line which sort of continued from my PhD, because I was lucky that there were still some open questions, of course, at the end. So some projects I kept having with my PhD advisors. So I kept that open while opening the new one with my mentor here. And now that some time has passed, and also I have gotten a chance to understand a bit better in which direction I actually want to go, I feel now I'm trying indeed to sort of reconcile, to keep working with my mentor here on certain problems that are also interesting for her, while now what I'm trying to do is actually to make my, for instance, PhD advisors engaged in something different, which is now, at the intersection of what they taught me and something else that now I'm interested in. And also by going to conferences, I'm more in touch with other collaborators, and so I'm trying to open new directions. I think I will simply go soon. I will travel and I will go visit them and open up new projects.
And what has been the biggest challenge so far in moving from PhD to postdoc life for you two?
So for me, it's actually very interesting. So when I was offered the position, well, it was in the continuation of whatever I was doing during my PhD. And I was very happy about it because I was like, well, this is the path that I've been on for like 4 years. I know all the gaps. I know the literature. I would be way ahead in my research. And then I remember I had a discussion with a colleague of mine here. And I was discussing these indeed. That I'm very happy, it's gonna be great, gonna have a proliferative research, very fruitful. And then he told me that, okay, and of course that is the case, but on the other hand, you have already addressed all the obvious gaps, so it would be hard to find the hidden ones. And it was at that point that I thought to myself that he is right. Indeed, I have already explored the obvious ones, the apparent ones, and there are things that are hidden and would be hard to find. And indeed, that was the case for me. So I remember it took like 4 or 5 months at the beginning of my postdoc that I had absolutely no idea what to do, because any idea that came to my mind, I had already tried it out. And there is this tendency that when you have picked an approach, it would be very hard to leave it and find something completely different. I would say it's like a hole that no matter how hard you try to get out of it, you simply just fall into it all over again. And for me, it took like 5 months, and indeed 5 months of no progress. I was just struggling to find the path. But yeah, in the end, I did it. I finally managed to get out of that hole, take another approach. But it was very difficult at the beginning for me. I would say that was my main challenge. I don't know, if I had worked on a completely different topic, it would have been easier to actually come up with results at a faster pace. But topic that you have already worked on for 4 years, I would say it is very hard to do so.
What did help getting us stuck and getting out of this technical loop, and also dealing with the associated stress, I would say, if I can ask?
Well, it somehow relates to your previous question. So there were some topics in my head related to my research during my PhD that I always wanted to pursue, but I never had the time. At the beginning of my postdoc, I was like, now it's a good opportunity to pursue them. And of course, the difficulty lied on the part that I was completely new to those topics. So it was a bit hard to, I had to do the literature review all over again because it was more or less new to me. But that actually helped. And the stress, yeah, indeed. I remember I kept counting the month. I was like, well, now it's been 3 months since the beginning of my postdoc. I haven't done anything. It's embarrassing, but yeah, I would say now if I go back in time, I would tell myself that just don't feel stressed. It's going to work out like the way it did during your PhD, so there's nothing to worry about. All you have to do is to be patient and, of course, focus on the job. Don't think about the outcome. Just think about doing the job itself.
Yeah, I think this is interesting because in a sense, I feel my experience with this regard has been maybe a bit complementary to what you say, Armin. Because, yeah, for instance, I also had, I felt like for quite a few months at the beginning of my first year as a postdoc, things weren't happening, or at least they weren't happening at the speed to which I was used to. But I think for me, it wasn't because I was getting into a new topic. All of a sudden, I was talking to my mentor who was coming from a very different perspective. And so I was sort of trying to, catch up with her and to sort of find how we could actually work together. And so that was actually difficult in the beginning because I felt that, when you get at the end of your PhD, then at that point, you're sort of confident in the kind of problem you've been working in, because as you say, well, you've worked on it for quite a long time. So even if you're presented with a new problem, there's at least, a set of tools that you're going to try to use them, and maybe they will lead somewhere, maybe not, but that's a safe point where to start. But changing suddenly quite a lot the approach I was using in my research, I really felt like, okay, I'm not even sure which tools I should use here, and I need to find a the way to understand this. And also I felt this pressure because, well, there's a lot, or at least, there's this pressure to publish, and I sort of felt like, okay, I'm in the postdoc, so like if I want to try to pursue a career later, then I need to publish like crazy. And so yeah, this was really stressing me out because I felt like, okay, but like I need to be much faster, but like I don't know how, because I need time to get acquainted with these things.
Indeed. Lara, I think even though during our PhD, we were supposed to already learn that we have to deal with this so-called imposter syndrome, But sometimes it seems that you keep carrying it because exactly at the beginning of your postdoc, you have too much expectation from yourself, which is unreasonable. And indeed, when you have already started a new topic, of course, it requires you some time to learn the topic. But what you expect from yourself is completely different. You think that, well, after a month, you should be able to publish a paper, and if you don't, then you think that maybe you are not cut out for this position. And this is the part I say the imposter syndrome kicks in, because one should tell themselves that if I weren't cut for this job, then I wouldn't have been hired for it. So obviously the supervisor, the mentor, is aware of the fact that your background is completely different and you need some time to find your place within this research. But yeah, this is something that one may miss. And for my case, I was pretty much stressed out because I was like, everybody expects me to do this very fast because it's the same topic. I've been doing this for 4 years, so the expectations are high.
But do they? I mean, was Bart saying, "Oh, come on, you have 3 months"?
No, poor Bart. He has never said anything. It's just in my head. But
that's, I think, is the important point. I went through the same struggle, so I understand that perfectly. Is that a lot of this is in our head, and sometimes maybe it's also about setting the expectation. I would say, knowing that during the PhD we start, as you said, the supervisor holds your hand until they can let go, and you become owner of that research because at that point you are the expert of that research. When you start the postdoc, now you are a collaborator.
Exactly.
And I'm not expecting you. First of all, I'm expecting to work with you on something a lot more challenging, which is already a challenge on its own. For a PhD, I need to know that some result can be taken out of the project, because otherwise you don't have a PhD. So I cannot put that responsibility on a student. But for a postdoc, I'm looking for a collaborator. So the project might be ill-defined, might be impossible. I know many cases of postdocs in which the main project actually didn't work out at all. Yeah. And I'm also expecting to deal with, indeed, a collaborator, another researcher. So I also know that even this doesn't work out, you still have your own research line that I'm expecting you to do at your own pace in parallel. So I know that is not completely on me. I can support you in many ways, even if the project is not going well. And I think this is something that takes time to figure out, and it takes time also to reduce the expectation of yourself. Also, when you are, I had your same experience, Lara, moving to a completely different topic. So it took a long time to understand and make peace with the way in this other field people were working, what the techniques, the ideas were, and how that field connected with what I was doing before. And so I could bring something different in.
Indeed.
And it's very interesting to realize that in the other way, you also have the problem that you have become expert, you have developed your techniques, but it might be that you need something new. And so you're stuck in your own way of thought, and you need to learn how to take a step back there. That's very interesting also to see this other point of view.
And about what you said, that all of these concerns are in our head, in our minds. I would always make this analogy. So it's like we are discussing a game, where the person who has written the rules is you, the referee is also you, and both of the teams that are competing with each other are you as well, and the outcome is always that you lose, So it's as crazy as that, and that's why, regarding of the situation that we were in, the result is always the same, and that's blaming yourself, having too much expectation of yourself, and I would say that maybe that is the biggest challenge to overcome.
Yeah, I very much agree. And I think indeed it is very important to, well, first off, to acknowledge, right, this all imposter syndrome set up and these expectations we put on ourselves. And I think it's also actually very nice. I have the feeling now we talk about this more. Or for instance, with respect to when I was a student, because I felt, I don't know, for instance, when I was a bachelor student, suddenly you have these professors in front of you and it sort of, or at least to me, it looked like they had it all figured out, but they probably didn't. But I didn't know it back then. But I feel now it's really nice that we are also like just more honest as researchers, and we talk about these things also with students so that they know that, you know,
Exactly.
we definitely, or at least I definitely don't have everything figured out.
Exactly. I would say the key to figure out is that there are no superhumans, you know. People are the same, I would say. Any sort of challenge that you have, there is a high chance that others have had them as well. So don't doubt yourself.
I hope that's good advice to some future postdocs. I'm wondering about a little bit earlier, why did you decide to actually do a postdoc after your PhD?
Yeah, so during my PhD, I was very much happy about the research and the kind of work I was doing. So in that sense, my mindset was just, you know, if I can go on and do this a little bit more, I would be happy about it, because it's very difficult to do, or probably impossible to actually do the kind of research I do in industry. So I was just, you know, in the mindset of being, okay, I would like to try and pursue this. I don't know how it's going to go, but I want to give it a shot. And so I started looking for postdoc positions. And at some point, to be honest, I was just very lucky, because I found very randomly this opening here in Groningen. And, you know, it looked like a position that was perfectly tailored to my profile. And so I was like, okay, well, I am definitely going to apply to this and let's see how it goes.
Armin?
Yeah, for me the path is very simple. So since the beginning I wanted to become a scientist. The irony is that math is formal science, but yeah, I always wanted to stay in academia, and postdoc is one of the, would say, necessary and crucial steps.
Let me go back to something, Lara, you said at the beginning. You said, I see this as an intermediate step to maybe get an academic position, but also maybe getting something else. And if we look at statistics, I'm not talking to you in particular, statistics, lots of people, after the PhD, also in mathematics, about 1/4, 1/5 of the PhD students will not continue with an academic career, and the statistics is the same with the postdoc. So we know that many postdocs will not continue with an academic career. So I'm curious, in which way you are experiencing this? Are you also developing a plan B, perhaps tailored to your other interests? You are not thinking about this and just see how it plays out? What is like for you?
So for me, let's say, I guess I am developing sort of a hidden plan B, in the sense that I think if I get the chance to, I would really love to stay in academia. But I think I'm also getting a bit more realistic on the fact that this might simply not happen. I mean, it's very difficult and there are not that many positions. And as for many things in life, but I feel this is especially true for academia, you need to be the right person at the right time. And this might not happen. So for now, I am in a phase in which I'm trying already to see if I can get some positions. But I'm also open, I'm starting to be more open to the idea that maybe I might not manage to, and so I might start applying for jobs in industry. I'm not looking actively into that right now, because there's still a lot of energy that goes, of course, in the postdoc life and also in the academic job search. But I think at some point I might start investing more energy in, let's say, applying for industry jobs.
But have you thought at least on what job would be fit for you, in the sense that you would like to do, that you would enjoy doing that, or not yet?
I've only thought about this vaguely, in a sense, like I think, let's say I'm not super experienced in programming, but I think I might maybe see myself working for some companies, maybe as a data analyst or so. I know there are definitely many positions like that where they hire mathematicians. So I think it would definitely be a very different job than what I do now. But I think, for instance, a very low-key thought I've had is that, so Lego has an office in Copenhagen in which they do data analysis, and to be honest, if they ever had an opening, that would probably be my dream industry job for Lego. So
working for Lego sounds really cool.
It is cool. Well, I completely agree with Lara that academia has a very difficult work environment in sense, and I would say there is no free lunch, huh? So if you have so much flexibility in academia, then that is the price you pay for it. And I would say it depends on how important it is for you to stay in academia. So if you want to truly stay in academia, then indeed, because it is very hard to find a position, you are somehow forced to let the job choose the life path for you. So I mean, if you are strict about staying in academia somewhere around your hometown, you don't have much chance. But if you are willing to make that sacrifice and let it decide for you, then yeah, maybe you would have the chance. So because I'm a little bit too strict about staying in academia, then I have already compromised with that. So I've prepared myself to make that sacrifice. Still, it may be not possible. Yeah, I'm too scared to think about that scenario.
Sorry for bringing up the scare.
Procrastinating it.
I was simply curious because if I think of myself, I hadn't planned for it too explicitly, but I had an actual plan B all over the place. So I didn't plan to use it ever. And then it was similar to what you said, in which life circumstances changed and I was no longer willing to move. And so at that point, it was between moving and following the job or not moving and following my other needs. And then what I realized is that not having thought realistically as the plan B, even though it was my plan B, made it very, very, very hard to decide to make the change.
Of course.
And so I was just curious to hear how you were doing that, especially because you brought it up at the beginning.
Yes.
And one more question that I would like to ask you. So if you have a recommendation for anyone doing a PhD right now that is undecided if they want to pursue a postdoc or not, what would you tell them?
So I think what I would maybe say is if they're really passionate and they really feel like they want to keep doing what they're doing, so like they want to keep being researchers and they get opportunities, then I think they should take them. I think, let's say, if you're in the position in which you're undecided, maybe already at the end of your PhD and you're sort of like, maybe for life reasons or maybe just for other reasons, if you're already contemplating industry jobs, then maybe it's healthy to try already to apply for both and see how it goes. Because then definitely, because of what we said also before, right, then the postdoc life will bring certain challenges. And if you don't, if you don't love what you do enough, then it might be that at some point you're just like, okay, but why am I even doing this? So I would definitely say go for it if you really feel like that's the thing you want to do. But if you're undecided, keep other doors open and start already maybe looking into in industry jobs. And there are, I think it might be like on a practical point of view, there are also these like career fairs. And I think it's also just nice to go to start having an idea of what is out there, just to have a look, let's say.
I personally think that at the end of the second year of their PhD, they have to start seriously thinking about choosing their future career path. I don't mean necessarily the long-term future, but at least the short one. From the fourth year, I guess it would be very good if they have already chosen the path, in a sense that what they are intending to do immediately after their PhD. At least in the sense that whether they want to go for industry or pursue a postdoc for a year or two. Because the good thing about making such decision at the beginning of their fourth year is that it would give them the time to actually find nice positions if they want to go for a postdoc, or nice positions in the academia. Because many would think that they have to start applying for postdocs, for instance, as their PhD is finished, which is not the case at all. Of course, it is typically recommended that you do this few months before the end of your PhD. So I would say the most important thing is to have a clear view of the future path, again, the short-term one, at the end of the third year of their PhD. This is really important.
Yeah, no, just to add to this, I think you're very right. This is a thing that maybe it's more true for academic positions that for other positions, you really need to think about these things in advance. So it's definitely true that if you're even only just thinking of doing a postdoc, then you should start applying, I would say even at least 1 year in advance before you finish, just if you don't want to be stressed out about it.
Yeah, you can at least make inquiries, about possible positions.
Yeah, so this is maybe something to keep in mind, that when if you want to pursue academic job, then you really need to plan a lot in advance, because these things really take time and
Indeed, because I've seen many people that even at the end of their PhD, they're still not sure about what they want to do, which is completely fine. I mean, it happens, but it would be better if people start to become more serious about it a bit before the end of their PhD. I would say it would help them a lot.
I fully agree with what you're saying, but I still see one big challenge, which actually may be relevant also for students, is how do you know what you would like to do?
Yeah.
It's a good point. That's why I mentioned the third or fourth year of PhD, because at least at that time you have already made some experience with the academic life, because at the beginning of your PhD you don't even know how doing a PhD feels like. But at the third year you have got a feeling of how it feels like to do research. That's why I would say would be a good point to start thinking about it.
While, let's say, I see your point there, but I also think it's actually, realistic that you might be undecided yet, or at least, I think that's fair. And so maybe a strategy, it's just, even if you are undecided, let's say, if you are not completely excluding the possibility, then you should sort of act as if that was a concrete possibility. Or say, you don't necessarily need to be decided, but if you are undecided, even if you are 40% academia, 60% industry, then to keep the door open, just apply. Or just work on it. Which of course it means adding stress and workload, but it's maybe worth it so that you can decide only in the end.
Or at least you get a feeling of, from the interviews, what it can be like, what kind of topics do they interest you or not. Also from the industry, what people are doing, what is reasonable, what topics might be more fit for me. What the interviews are like also. Maybe you won't accept any of the position at that point, but you get an understanding of what the interviewing process is like. I think that's both are valuable suggestions in this.
Just to clarify, I would say the main problem is not taking measures, and procrastinating this to sometime later. Because I would say as long as you are doing your bachelor's, master's, and even PhD, the future path, at least the short-term one, is already determined for you. You're doing your bachelor's, you know what to do to get into the master's. You are in your master's, you know what to do to get into the PhD. But at the end of PhD, you finally reach the point that you would stand at a dilemma and you have to make decisions. So my point is that sometimes people, I feel like that they try to escape thinking about it, they don't want to encounter this because it is difficult, of course. So I would say, indeed, in complete agreement with Lara, you don't have to be sure about your future path, but at least you have to have already made the decision to think about it, to become serious about it.
Yeah, and also in the middle, toward the end of your PhD, I think you had enough frustrating moments to know if you actually like that type of experience of massive frustration and then
celebration.
Celebration, and then immediately after another massive frustration, and it just goes on and on. So that's something that either you make peace with it, or that's maybe something to think about.
Well, thank you, Lara and Armin, for being here, for being guests on our podcast. I think it was a very enlightening episode, and I hope to see all the listeners in our next episode. Thank you for listening.
And if you like the episode, make sure to share it with your friends.